So Turning Red was pretty great, wasn't it? Pixar's latest movie struck a chord with many through its lovable characters, balls-to-the-wall teen cringe, messages about the importance of independent personal growth, and themes surrounding the impact of living under the crushing weight brought on by decades of generational trauma. You know, entertainment for the masses! Not long before the film's release, however, I noticed something peculiar. Pixar has released 16 films in the last 12 years, with 3 more coming in the next 2, including another this year. Shouldn't you slow down a bit? This can't be good for your employees' health or that of the industry as a whole. So, why has this happened? Let's find out. I bring this to your attention as an animation appreciator and online reviewer for 2 reasons. One, I'm sick of Pixar and Disney figuratively justifying a yearly release just so they can snag the Best Animated Feature Oscar out of voter ignorance every time. And secondly, how can I get hyped for a studio's output when their next film is only 3 months after the last one, which came 4 months after the previous? 5 months after the preceding 2, and so on. I mean, it's excessive, isn't it? While the specific case is most likely due to the pandemic, it still paints a worrying picture if the big cheese and their surrogate sidekick both have to ensure they release a film every damn year, even though they don't need to. Disney's animated classic line was on an alarmingly consistent rate of output itself until 2015, when they just decided to alleviate the pressure? They followed up this break with Moana and Zootopia in 2016 before taking 2017 off. The next 2 years saw the release of sequels to Wreck-It Ralph and Frozen, the first non-home media continuations of established animated classic films since Rescuers Down Under in 1990, and then nothing in 2020. Hoping that the live-action Mulan could do enough to satiate whilst we were all stuck at home. To say it didn't was an understatement. Pixar have just kept going though, regardless of a heartless global health crisis, because Disney themselves know how important a Pixar film is to their bottom line. They have a track record of continually succeeding critically and at the box office, solely thanks to a reputation of consistent quality that has been amassed over 3 decades. This explains why they've used their last films to market Disney+. Pay a fee to go here to see arguably our best film of the year because you and we know it's true. The yearly cycle from both sides of Disney's animated freeway is a product of their success. They spend millions to make millions in order to maintain their market dominance. To put this whole thing into perspective, filmmaking in general is hard, but usually can be wrapped up in 1.5 years tops on average if everything goes to plan. These films take far longer to come to fruition, given how Turning Red from pitching to release took 5 years of work, even though it was considered one of the fastest developed films in Pixar's entire history. Really does hit that point home. It makes you question, how long did these other films take to still have this schedule work regardless of that? Do you see where I'm coming from? This should not be possible. Yet it is. This is thanks to an extremely well-oiled machine that, unbeknownst to some, were the ones who came up with this whole 1 film a year thing in the first place, to keep the whole damn studio alive. Through the 1970s, Disney had been in a steady decline after their eponymous founder died, with many steps taken to reduce costs, leading to a bunch of films that didn't generate a lot of public enthusiasm and monetary incomings. Consumer apathy had festered intently by the time 1985's The Black Cauldron was released, with an inability to recoup its sizable budget maligned by prolonged production delays, alongside it being considered the most un-Disney-like film the studio ever made. Jeffrey Katzenberg's attempts to make it commercially viable by editing it himself failed, but his continued blunt, exasperated, and stern by the collar leadership over the ensuing years returned relatively pleasing successes for The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company. With the company's foot just slightly jammed back in the door, he instigated the one film a year crunch-influenced mandate, damn nearly breaking the artists and his fellow executives in the process. However, in time, audiences had noticed the quality had shifted, they shelled out money at the box office, and the effort was starting to pay off as Disney returned to prominence as the new decade was born. Animated film boomed on the back of Disney's resurgence, with the company keeping to that schedule, only missing 1 year, 1993. Given that they had 4 films on the go at varying stages of production in this year, it's understandable to have left a gap somewhere for them to breathe. Seeing all the money that Disney was making, studios decided to take a punt on it, with DreamWorks, Sony, Warner Bros., Illumination, Paramount, and others coming through in the decade and beyond, all adopting the same framework and mostly stuck to it, flooding the Western cinematic market with a variety of animated films over the next 3 decades. Fox's attempts at one every 18 months stuttered and the studio fell apart. Their CG subsidiary Blue Sky had a 3-year gap between the first Ice Age and Robots before managing to keep up with the yearly cycle, with 2010 and 2018 their only empty years before Disney unceremoniously and unfairly closed them. The Disney-backed Pixar took time to catch up, but once they did, as noted, haven't stopped, with 2005 and 2014 being the only non-film release years in the past 20. Disney, who only released 19 films between 1937 and 1986, not including packaged ensemble films, I see you sneering over the comment section, have released 34 under their animated classics banner since 1988, including 3 in 2000 alone. Once you include Pixar's filmography, as the studio was bought by Disney in 2006, that year-on-year record has all but 1993 accounted for. If you want to be pedantic, you could slide Nightmare Before Christmas into 1993's place, as it was the highest-grossing animated film of that year and was due to be an animated classic before it was considered too adult for the label. But even without it, it's frankly unbelievable. 2 entire generations have never had to wait longer than 6 months to a year for a Disney/Pixar animated film. Add it together with the other studios keeping up with them, with a new film every damn year on average from them, and my god, it's just ridiculous. The sheer scale of this is frightening, given how hard it is to make these types of films. How and why do studios continue to do this? Well, as I noted earlier, the desire for and the utilization of cold, hard cash. As Liza Minnelli bluntly put it, money makes the world go round. Other creative industries do have to juggle the financial implications with their production and releases, much like Disney, but at least they're staggered for the most part. It takes time to release a video game, a book, a work of art, a board game, or even an album. We've seen what happens when these properties are expedited when not fully ready, and it's often to the audience's detriment when reduced to a yearly cycle with the sole purpose of siphoning money from them. You may say to me though, oh, Nintendo releases games from multiple franchises a year, so why not throw a brick at them? Yes, but have you seen the gaps between the games in these franchises? Not to mention, they haven't got such a stranglehold over video games to where it feels oppressive to the consumer. Live action films are released en masse by studios too, but the consumer doesn't care about the studio. They look for the actors, or the directors, or the screenwriters, rather than who funded and distributed them. For animation, the same can't be said. When it comes to Disney and Pixar, who leads and stars in the film, means nothing compared to their name being the one you remember, and honestly, say something like this. Have you seen the latest Disney film? That's much more commonly uttered than, say, have you seen the latest Warner Brothers film? Have you seen the latest Fox film? Have you seen the latest Paramount film? Do you see how weird that sounds? Now, obviously, animation fans will be able to subvert this, but most ordinary consumers who do not care about such things likely won't. Some are so ignorant about animation, they will just assume that the only films worth seeing in animation are Disney's. Overexposure through repeatedly yearly releases, then, impacts animation way more than the rest of the film industry when this is taken into account. With animated films from these big names coming every other month, there's no way they can linger on the mind longer than a few weeks. Is this overall sustainable going forward? In all fairness, no. Especially if it takes a few more years for cinema grosses to return to pre-pandemic levels and streaming is relied on more. The pre-pandemic average production budget of a big animated film from Disney, Pixar, Illumination, Sony, and DreamWorks since around 2010 is around $113 million, with them grossing on average somewhere between $300 and $400 million. It's hard to believe that studio heads and shareholders would be willing to maintain this kind of expediting monetary value after such seismic changes that have to be accounted for. They must presume that we'll just mindlessly watch these films if these numbers are considered possible again. The fact that Spider-Verse's long-awaited sequel is being split into 2 parts, a practice that died a painful death for live action close to a decade ago, is a prime example of this mentality not going away, especially in light of live-action superhero movies fueled and owned by Disney being released yearly, supporting that, to where Sony feels that they have to do it. The narrative strength of a film is going to suffer just so shareholders can embrace a more substantial yearly earnings report. It's why I feel laboured and encumbered by the sheer scale of all this. As a consumer, I can't even begin to feel what it's like for those who work on these eye-straining, wrist-breaking labours. It must be incredibly tough to have to maintain a standard of objective quality in order to ensure it's produced in a period where the financial windfalls have been crippled where they once were obscenely high, which should have shaken the process into change, but it seemingly hasn't at all. It's why I look at places like Aardman, Comics Wave, Shizu, Cartoon Saloon, Laika, and Ghibli, with assurances of their work being made without money and time being such an intrinsic factor to their quality and success. Their artists are given the time to carefully put together something that can be appreciated more by the audience who's seen them, so that once they are out, they remain longer in the memory rather than having to immediately shift focus to the next one. This is what builds you a loyal following rather than a plateau of ambivalence through there always being another one right around the corner to shift attention to. How can fans truly care when they fly off a production line so fast that it's nearly impossible for it to register? The fact that all but one of these aforementioned studios are not American shouldn't be surprising. Only an American capitalist institution can be so consumed by money that you as a consumer reach a point of apathy to where you have gradually lost your anticipation for their output. The fact that I haven't enthusiastically looked forward to and watched a Disney or Pixar film immediately on release for non-YouTube purposes since Inside Out in 2015 should highlight that point. If not for last year's Best and Worst Animated Films project, I'd have probably waited until Encanto was on Disney+. I waited close to 3 months after their release to watch Luca and Raya. Hell, if it wasn't for my friends collectively wanting to watch it, I would have waited a few weeks to give Turning Red a shot, all because my enthusiasm had been tapped dry years ago. This is made worse when it comes to the other animation studios. I haven't watched most of, if any, of their output over the last decade. Did they just not appeal to me specifically? Possibly, but it's most likely down to me being able to see right through them and note very little objective quality existing within them. Maybe I have too high a standard set against an industry I've always loved and respected, but there are films out there that do not feel like vapid cash grabs to sit through, so it's definitely possible. But realizing most animated films put out these days are vapid cash grabs means I have to conclude summarily. Will the American animation industry slow down its sheer volume of releases? Honestly, with Disney and Pixar at the helm of it, I would say no. They're too entrenched in their ways to alter course now, and the rest will follow it blindly because as long as it works for the industry leaders, it'll do so for them too. I'm not praying for animation's hefty bubble to burst, but one day this will happen. I am assured of it. There's bound to be a major animated equivalent to a Heaven's Gate or Batman and Robin somewhere out there. I cautiously await the film that will ensure this industry is brought down to earth so it can evaluate where its priorities are, and hopefully continues to produce the quality we expect without needing to be so damn impatient to take money from our wallets. I've been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this is the CT Network, and I will see you all next time.